Thank you, Christine and Steve. That was amazing and overwhelming. We will take questions. If you have a question, you can use the hand raising thing, or you can just raise your hand on the screen and we'll be watching. You will have to unmute if you have a question. It's kind of overwhelming to know where to start, I know. Abigail, you have a question.
I put this in the chat as well, but I was curious whether the revised paper you're hoping to have available in time for the State League Convention, which is May 19 through 21. I can help.
Well, you're known as a good writer, so it would be nice. I guess reflecting on this situation, I have spent a lot of time going through the legislative mandates, and I know I put on a note in one of those slides, but if you look at when some of those were written, they were written in the 60s and the 70s, and they haven't been sufficiently updated in their approaches and understanding how to make it work. So I think there's real daylighting that needs to happen in that, and we would welcome. We have no fixed time period because we're all volunteers, but it would be nice to try to have something to share. Thank you so much for that idea.
Other questions, comments? We will accept comments as well as questions. Francis.
In the plans for this container facility, where is the storage of all of those units going to be? Have they even presented that information yet?
Steve, do you want to take a shot at that? And I can chime in.
Well, it's uncertain where storage would be done and exactly where and how trains could be built there. What they're proposing to move those 2.4 million TEUs would be production that would be even greater than was done by Maersk, the international shipper, and the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach there, where they move just under 1 million TEUs a day per year, and they get out, they say, between 3 and 4 trains a day. Here, I believe the proposal will be to run 6 trains a day, 6 out with loaded containers and 6 back with empties and organ products. So it needs more detail to understand just how that could be done.
I might also add that the space on the North Spit is very limited. The maximum space that we've seen indicated for the facility would be about 220 acres. I think that's right, Steve. You and I have gone through that.
Yeah,
and
I think that's very close.
And it's constrained, but certainly environmentally constrained. We didn't discuss how winds affect the movements of trains, of cranes. Those cranes can only operate under certain wind speeds, and we certainly know that there's quite a bit of wind, especially on the North Spit. The other thing is the constraints of the property ownership, because the federal government owns considerable amount of land on the Spit. It's a huge recreational facility and appreciated. It's the largest consecutive sand dune formation in North America. It has huge environmental value. So expanding into that is not something on the books. So, and Steve showed the one slide of the train tracks that service along the causeway there and so forth. It's really constrained because of the structural features of the Spit itself.
The APM terminal that Maersk operates down in LA Long Beach has 23 rail tracks on its rail yard. And it's tough to see how they could fit that kind of width in back of their proposed container terminal. And you have to have that space to store, load, and build new trains running out of the facility. So, and coming in as well. So it's just, it's very unclear that how that would be done, and if it could be reasonably done. And it's a challenging environment, I think, to build a container terminal.
Paul put in the chat, how many wind turbines are currently in operation on the Oregon coast? Do you know that?
0. We have some people on the call. I think Mike Graybill's there. He's been following this. Maybe Mike can answer that. California has 0 at this point too, but they've got some leases.
So actually, this is Jan Harder. Mike's actually just got a telephone call that he had to answer. So, but there are none. The process is nowhere close to being ready to put anything in the ocean. We're still at the point where they are deciding. They have the potential spaces for where they might go. 2 places, one off of Coos Bay, one off of the more southern Oregon coast. But those areas haven't even been leased yet. So we're nowhere close to having anything in the water. It's much a longer process than we're just at the very beginning of a very long process.
Thank you, Jan. Other questions, comments? Ashley says there's also property lots. Oops, you just disappeared. There's also property lots on the North Spit owned by or need to be consulted by the Confederated Tribes of the Coos Lower, Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians too.
Ashley's spot on. She might want to talk a little bit about that, but certainly when I look at where the potential site is in terms of off from the hollering place is a very important, significant historical use by the Confederated Coos tribe members as they were moving back and forth from the Spit into Empire. So those are very, very important considerations in understanding land use and feasibility of development. And Ashley might want to comment on that. That's just sort of the open door of some of the components. Consultation, when it comes to the Corps, I mean, even if they're doing $4.5 million worth of studies, the federal government requires consultation with Indian tribes. So that is definitely a requirement. And it came to forth with the Jordan Cove issues, and those, if anything, have not gone away. They've been enhanced by decision-making up and through the Supreme Court.
Abigail also notices the endangered species habitat on the North Spit, the snowy plover, that those of us who've lived here for a long time are well aware of. And not just the snowy plover, but that's the big one. Although I think that's more on the ocean side. Any other questions, comments? Jackie.
Yeah. I was just going to say it was a really informative presentation and I appreciate it. I was sort of, I had to sign a lot of information or letters when I was in Rogue Valley for the pipeline. And so this, to me, kind of coordinates a lot with what I'd read in those letters. So it's been a really interesting discussion, presentation. Thank you.
Well, it it takes a village, and we're all part and parcel of this. I'm sure with the Rogue Valley, that was a
Yeah.
good time.
Yeah, busy.
It does feel like almost a continuation of the LNG plan, and that there are so many of the same issues involved around the estuary. Somebody else, Mike Graybill, a chat. If you want to learn more about offshore wind in Oregon, Mike did a great presentation for the Shoreline Education for Awareness Group. You can Google that, and it's their website.
Yeah, I'll chime in too. There's a presentation that Mike, Jan, and I did that I have on a YouTube channel that I could share. I think it was at American Fisheries Society meeting, but it's going to be moved to one of the other NGOs, and maybe Jan can help me with the right names on that, but I can provide that privately to anyone who is interested.
Yeah, I can't quite remember what the NGO's name is either. So, but
Acronyms, please. NGO is
Non-governmental 5013C organization.
Thank you. It's impossible not to speak in acronyms, but we want to.
Yeah.
Abigail.
Will the report include any component about the hydrology impacts within the bay and also on the outer shore of this level of proposed dredging?
Yes, we actually incorporated some of that in our comments on the Jordan Cove as to what it does when you dig a big ditch out there. I might just bring in now, and Ashley's here on this call, and Jan and Mike. This ties in to a revision of the estuary management plan. The estuary management plans were a required component to meet with the restrictions of federal government coastal zone management, trying to have consistency in how we authorize land development and so forth. The estuary management plan for Coos Estuary is a 1984 document. It is currently, there's a current contract from the University of Oregon to try to update that with information. We are trying to get a handle on where they are in that process. There was an open meeting that I know we gave good publicity for, but it's a time for public engagement because what we knew about the estuary in 1984 has been changed a lot with more information, more monitoring, and understanding of the hydrology of how things work in a sand and also with the substrates out there. A good deal of the substrate is bedrock below the existing 37-foot deep federal navigation channel. So when you start moving bedrock, you've got some challenges too. So there's a real opportunity. I think I would ask Linda to sort of, if people want to send an email to our general league that they want to be part and parcel of this, I think I put that on the last slide. We would love to have you engage. Educating ourselves is ongoing, and the more people we have with different skill sets is great.
I just think there's such a great need to make this information accessible to the general public because it's really overwhelming to those of us who are not scientists. But it's very important that people understand their estuary and how it works and how fundamental it is to the ecology of the whole world. It's just incredibly important. Estuaries are what make it all work. And we have a big estuary here that's incredibly important. But I think that when you live here, you don't really understand it very well. And I think it can be made understandable. I don't think it has to be completely out of reach. That's just my editorial opinion.
It looks like Ashley has raised her hand. Go ahead, Ashley.
I don't even see you, Ashley, but go ahead and talk.
Oh, great. Thanks, folks.
There you are.
Hi. Yeah, my name's Ashley Audicki, and I'm with Road Climate for those who may not know me. And yeah, just thinking about, we're thinking about this whole port container terminal project, offshore wind, and what's a solution that we can do? And that's where that estuary management plan becomes really critical of thinking about solutions to some of these developmental issues that this plan really got challenged during Jordan Cove LNG just so many times, so misinterpreted. And that's where I appreciate Alice's comments about thinking about ways on how we can really celebrate the estuary, make it understandable for folks to think about, like, hey, we have this great resource here. If we work on a solution like improving the plan to acknowledge climate change, for instance, and some other key critical issues, that's like one of the great things that we can do to be proactive about some of these really big issues. Because I feel like sometimes, especially thinking about what's happened in the past through Jordan Cove LNG and what's happening with the port, it is like a lot of reacting to what developers are proposing. And that's where I've been trying to shift my brain of thought of like, what are some of those proactive steps that we can do? And so I know I'll be in contact with folks from the league and other organizations thinking about ways on how we can celebrate the estuary. So I know at Road Climate we're thinking about ways on how we can get community involved and welcome folks from the league to help join that process of thinking just ways of education for the community at large, because I know folks have mentioned, like, for instance, this plant in the bay called eelgrass, and that's like one of those things that could be a climate tool if we protect it. It can help store carbon more efficiently than trees. And you talk to folks around the community about that, and folks, it just hasn't been accessible information for people. So however we can create that access, I think, is really, 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 really critical. So between now and June, there'll be it'll be a great opportunity for folks to think about ways on how we can create solutions. And I know there's a lot more to dig into with the Coos Bay Estuary Management Plan in particular. So really appreciate folks bringing that up. Wow. I know it does get really overwhelming thinking about all the elements of the port project and offshore wind, and sometimes that thinking about the estuary management plan helps me out with thinking about what are some of the steps that we can take now to help out our wonderful bay. And thanks for hosting this conversation, and appreciate all the work that the league is doing.
Mike, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Following up on Ashley's comments and also on Steve and Christine's presentation, it's noteworthy that the estuary management plan, back in its day when it was created, had a full appendix or section in it that was projections on proposed vessel uses that the Department of Land Conservation required port authorities to undertake in order to estimate projected needs for moorage and other accommodations for vessels. The information that's in that historic report and evaluation is clearly dated because it was done in the 1970s. And there's been many changes in our fisheries and our recreational activities. But as the estuary management plan is revised, and as the port revises its strategic plan, it may be appropriate timing for the league to make a finding that it would be appropriate to take another look at what the anticipated moorage and marina requirements are for the estuary, because those have great potential to alter the estuary at the same time accommodating the needs of vessel operators in the bay. So I offered that as one idea, and I put in the chat that at the upcoming meeting of the March meeting of the Shoreline Education Awareness Group, I'm on deck to give an overview presentation relating to the functions and values in the management of estuaries. And I'm sure if any league members are interested, they would be welcome to sit in on that presentation as well.
And Mike, could you give the information about that to Linda to put on our website for our members?
Yeah, sure. I'll do that as follow-up.
Thank you so much. I look forward to that presentation.
Might I offer just one final observation? Is the information that's been presented in this report is spanning the evaluation that the league is doing is spanning a 20-year period, but much of the information that we've compiled so far has only been in the last couple of years. And the context in which investments in the rail infrastructure are being made at the moment could well be better presented in a larger time frame. It's my understanding that up to this point, since the port has acquired the railroad, for example, there's already been $100 million invested in rail improvements. So that as we present information about the most recent $600,000 investment in a bridge or what have you, that $600,000 investment may be better presented in the broader context of how much investment has been made during the past 20-year period. And I'd be certainly willing to help with the compilation of that information.
I think that's a really good point, Mike. Thanks.
Yeah, Steve has a working list of some of that that he provided in our first presentation a year ago, but we sort of didn't, and I think we haven't made it a full document, so that would be fantastic.
I have found about $80 million of that $100 million Mike mentions, but there are about $20 million that I have not located.
Ann Bellamy in the chat says to know more about the activities of the Port of Coos Bay. They have a website that includes their meeting minutes and agendas and management reports. They also save their monthly meetings on YouTube. I am not going to make the editorial comment that I want to make there, but thank you, Ann, for letting us know that.
Yeah, it's been our primary resource because we sort of need to find out what's happening, and reading the minutes and the publications there are the best thing. And that's to also see the presentations by the fishing community have been fairly impressive. And they're still at the meeting every month asking the port to sign on to the resolution on offshore wind.
Francis?
It is on the Board of Commissioners agenda on Tuesday to initiate the legislative process to update the estuary plan. This is being presented by Jill, the planning director. So the process to start this is on the agenda for approval. Just FYI.
If anyone's interested, part of this estuary management plan update has has not hit a lot of daylight in terms of what exactly they're doing, but from what we've been able to understand, the partnership for coastal waterways is really it's just a loose group of people that meet to discuss things. And so a couple of us attended that meeting and have asked for a wider distribution of effort. Steve and I went to the open meeting with the consultants that was held at the North Bend Community Center, and Ashley and some of her related the Oregon Shores and Road Climate and the Coastal Watch, Forest Watch, really put forth announcements about that public meeting. And if they hadn't done that, no one would have known about the meeting. And so we are pushing on that. And the port has always been part of that dialogue. Thank you, Alice, or Francis. Jan, it looks like Jan's got her hand up.
Hi, good morning. I have not followed this well for a variety of reasons, but the question that comes most to me is this: how does the port justify the plan to put a terminal here that is so clearly negated by the kinds of data that you and Steve have identified? What I'd like to have happen for my own sake is direction to the justification presented by the port for those reasons. Because the thing that I keep hearing from people who are not as engaged as you are, or even as engaged as I am, is that it'll create jobs. It seems like those jobs are in jeopardy, as is the estuary, as is everything about it. Is there something that you can point me to that I have not been paying attention to clearly?
Come on, Christine, step up.
Okay, well, I just was watching the CBS newscast last night from Eugene, and they had the woman that is now with the House of Representatives that has replaced DeFazio, and she was mentioning how important this project is. And
that's actually part of my background question, Christine, because I heard this Val Hoyle say the same thing.
I was just mortified, actually. And I have been conveying some of this to our Oregon League of Women Voters folks. They're the only folks that go to at least the local legislature regularly and follow things. But yeah, it's the same thing. There's significant holes in this, and as private citizens, Steve and I and Ann wrote comments to the Department of Transportation and to the White House and to Merkley's office. And all we ever get, when we finally followed up, we said, did you receive our documents? And we finally got an answer to that. I don't know how to get the attention of these folks, because I think, as we call it, the new term is greenwashing, but it's very discouraging that we don't have, and part of the reason the port has such power is that it's in the legislature. They get lots of money. If you saw the budget, their outreach, their legislative affairs outreach is $750,000. Jan, I
understand the state.
Would love to hear some ideas about how to raise this, and I think the the scientific community, but anybody that follows ports, and Steve's made some visits. I had a project a few years ago that took me to some of the major ports in California, and so I was on the ground seeing the operations, and those are really big operations, and there's a reason they're in large metropolitan areas. And the reason is that, there's tunnel vision and people living in their silos. But I think the point that we made at the end of this presentation is that we have an opportunity now with a couple of new members of the commission, because I think they have, perhaps they're bringing a different perspective and agenda to the table, particularly to have a fisherman on that.
I'm glad that that's happening, but I think that there also needs to be a public relations effort to show that the effort is likely to be unsuccessful and that the jobs that are promised, the economic benefits, are fragile at best. So I would be glad to hear more about that, study more about that, and if I can help in that way, I will be glad to. Thank you. This has been an eye-opener. Thank you.
Once we have an updated position, then we are in a better position to go ahead and do some of the things that we did, about the LNG, for example, and get some information to the public. So it's critical that we get this update finished. Ashley?
Yeah, thank you. I remember the point/question I was gonna bring up earlier. Christine used the term greenwashing that made me think about. I'm not sure if this is going to be included in the league's report. Is the port has been like using the term like eco port, and they've been calling that this port is going to be a leading example for environmental standards for ports, and we still don't really know what that actually means, I feel like. And there was like a town hall last summer with DeFazio, North Point, and the port where hydrogen was brought up, and there's still, I mean, in my opinion, like not enough information about how this container port is going to be like, air quotes, eco-conscious. So I'm not sure if that's something that, I'm sorry if I missed that earlier, if it was brought up, but yeah, there's some concerns about, port using greenwashing terms and possibly proposing an energy resource that could be just as harmful as LNG. So it's not being like really talked about, but I know that there's some background conversations about what would be the energy making this port container facility a air quotes eco-friendly port.
I don't know how you can dredge the bay 8 feet and call it eco-friendly, but that's just me.
The cold ironing that they promoted, and they were saying it doesn't even use trucks, it goes directly to rail. Well, there's a reason it doesn't use trucks, because you don't have a highway that the trucks could use. And cold ironing is going on everywhere. And I mean that getting rid of the diesel powered ships that are running their diesels while they're plugged in offloading, it doesn't happen anymore. And they're all the EPA regs and everything. That's nothing new. Cold ironing has been around a long time.
We are at our hour and a half. Are there any final questions, concerns? I want to thank all of you for being here today, and it's just been a real illuminating discussion, and I appreciate everybody's involvement. We will be finishing up on this, and like Christine and Steve have pointed out, they can use some more help. So with that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, everyone. And we will get the YouTube done and have it posted and the link on our web.